industry for a long time, who are going to express their views on what marijuana investments look like today and how they're going to do in the years moving ahead. So, of course, I can't be the moderator for this because I'd probably talk more than anybody else on the panel. So we have to designate it to an intelligent, kind, friendly, cordial, I can't find the word. But I'm going to introduce Marc Ross before I really embarrass myself in the next few minutes. So please give a warm welcome to Marc Ross, the moderator.
So while everybody's sitting down, let me introduce myself and tell you a little bit about the panel. And I don't know how long you want us to go, but...
About 30 to 45 minutes?
Okay. So my name is Marc Ross. I'm a partner at a law firm in Manhattan, Sichenzia, Ross, Ference, Kesner. We specialize in microcap companies. We've come here for many years. And I also am an adjunct professor teaching the first business and law of marijuana in the country over in New York. And I advise and counsel clients in connection with the space. The gentlemen to my right are all very experienced, all have a unique perspective on it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them all to briefly introduce themselves, and the emphasis on the word brief, because we don't have a lot of time. It's going to be important that we leave it open for questions. We have a couple of topics. Our focus is really what's going to be in the next 5 years in terms of investing. And obviously, everybody knows politically, things have changed. With the SEC, things have changed. In the regulatory environment, things have changed. We're going to discuss all of that. But first, let me allow everybody to briefly introduce themselves. Leslie.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Marc. My name is Leslie Bocksor. I am the president of Electrum Partners. We are an advisory firm that provides business and licensing advisory services to businesses in the industry. We also do some pro bono work, helping states establish their regulatory frameworks, and we are setting up a vehicle that will be investing in the industry across the country, and then some, even looking at emerging markets.
My name is Nick Kovacevich. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Kush Bottles. We are publicly traded under the symbol KSHB. We do all the compliant packaging solutions for the cannabis industry. We have facilities in California, Colorado, and Washington. We service over 1,500 cannabis businesses. These are either dispensaries, retail stores, cannabis cultivators, producers, and processors across all 28 legal states. And I'm very happy to be here on this panel with these fine gentlemen. So thank you guys for coming.
Well, thank you. Fine gentleman.
All right, Isaac, you're one of those fine gentlemen, too.
Hello, my name is Dietrich. I'm the CEO of MassRoots. We're one of the largest social platforms for cannabis consumers. We're an app on your phone. We have about 900,000 users, and we're traded under the ticker MSRT.
I'm Derek Peterson, founder and CEO of Terra Corp, symbol TRTC on the QX. We actually have a bit of a bifurcated business. We have a traditional agricultural side where we grow regular produce. We sell to Walmart, Kroger's, Marshes, a bunch of other retailers in the Northeast and Midwest. In addition to that, we run and operate 4 retail dispensaries in Nevada, as well as building out a cultivation and extraction facility, and 2 dispensaries in California, as well as a large-scale cultivation and extraction facility. Seed to sale on the cannabis front, and been doing it since 2010.
Okay, well, why don't we start with you, Derek? And I guess let's start off in the regulatory framework. Where do you see the regulatory framework going, and how do you think that's going to impact people thinking about investing over the next couple of years? Let's say use a 5-year horizon.
I was actually here to figure out what's going on with the regulatory framework. No, listen, we're a highly regulated industry, and you don't see that many of those in the course of your investing time horizon, right? You went through internet gaming, you watched how regulation could affect that, as well as traditional gaming. There's a lot of parallels to what we do as far as that's concerned. We've had a bit of an uphill battle since 2010. We started to get some wind at our backs the last couple of years under the Obama administration and through some of the other legislation that's taken place. Today we've got a change of administration that I think we're all very, very acutely aware of. And how does that impact us on the cannabis front? We're not exactly sure just yet. And I think some people have been talking about the appointment of the current Attorney General being Jeff Sessions, and that causing some alarm because he's a bit of a drug war dinosaur. And how is that going to necessarily impact of what's gone on nationwide. But what we see today is that as a majority of our population lives within states that have some semblance of cannabis decriminalization or regulation, coupled with the fact a significant amount of those states now are red states. If you look at the voting polls, if you look at the voting polls that have taken place, the public perception polls, it's now well over half the country is in support of this. And you look at swing states, about 60% of the swing states now have some form of decriminalization or regulation. So we're certainly optimistic about the legislative framework, but what direction it's going to go from today going forward, I don't necessarily know. We believe and we're betting on the fact that it's going to maintain and remain the status quo to a certain degree. But again, there's going to be an attorney general in a position that doesn't have the same outlook that we have, but we have an administration that's very, very focused on 10th Amendment states' rights, and the voters have certainly sent a message, especially with this last election cycle, where more people got out to vote on cannabis initiatives than they did the presidential election. So those numbers are significant, and they create quite an opportunity for a paradigm shift, but we just don't have any certain clarity at this point.
Now, we also know that there is a distinction between recreational and medical. And I guess everybody up here is in the recreational market, though. So I guess, Isaac, how do you see the new administration coming and impacting your world? You had a battle with your whole Facebook and with Apple, right, when you were started out?
Well, when the regulatory change that we're most focused on is the delivery laws. So right now in California, there's no statewide regulations allowing delivery. Some companies are operating in the gray area. And then in nearly every other regulated market, including Colorado, delivery is completely banned. We're under the opinion that 5 years from now, marijuana is going to be like everything else. People are just going to open their app on their phone and they're going to order marijuana and have it delivered directly to their homes. So those are the laws that we're most focused on. And we also think that the delivery itself isn't actually the competitive advantage, because Uber is just going to have an API where you can just pick something up from point A and deliver it to point B. So we're focused on building everything else around that experience, so like the user reviews and the information that affects people's purchasing decisions. But the actual delivery itself is going to be where the money is, because if you can get a percentage of that transaction, that's where the real money is going to be made over the next 5 years. But I don't think the incoming administration is going to impact the industry at all. I think it was an overreaction on the industry's part, but I really don't think that who Attorney General is that no one's going to shut down the industry. There will be riots in the streets. We'd be taking away hundreds of thousands of dollars from the schools in Colorado. You'd be destroying tens of thousands of jobs, shutting down small business owners. No politician's going to want to have that.
So Leslie, Derek touched on the 10th Amendment in states, and we know that it's legal in 28 states and it's illegal under the federal. So, do you think how do you see that playing out? As Isaac says, in terms of delivery. I mean, obviously you can't go across state lines still, right?
No, you can't have it at all. So you can cross state lines, because I don't see anybody really enforcing people driving from Los Angeles to Las Vegas and waiting at Prim, Nevada and saying, do you have any cannabis in the car? We're going to stop you. So yes, you can't cross state lines with it, although that's not the main thing that we're looking at. We do see a future where, especially under this administration, where we might see states share liquidity, so to speak, in their market the way they did in internet gaming, where you could see states that have borders, for example, Pennsylvania. They have done something that's very different from any other state, again, under states' rights. When they passed their medical marijuana law this April, Act 16, they decided to flex their muscles a little bit as regards the 10th Amendment, saying, well, if we're going to make medical marijuana legal, what else around that can we do that will benefit the citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? And so they said the FDA and the DEA are getting in the way of any clinical trials. So they set up a category of license called the clinical registrant that is going to allow people to apply for a license that partners with a research hospital and university, like Thomas Jefferson or Einstein, Drexel, Temple, etc., and go into clinical trials in the state of Pennsylvania, essentially creating a parallel track to the FDA on a local basis. We imagine that the states that border Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Ohio, if they so chose, could say, well, if it's gone through the clinical trials in Pennsylvania and there's efficacy and safety proven, we will allow that to be sold in our jurisdictions as well. And so we imagine that that's a states' rights issue as well. And we see a future where that might be something that happens, as long as it's on the basis particularly of a parallel track to the FDA proving efficacy and safety on a clinical trial basis over a couple of years.
I think the important distinction is you have the medical marijuana, we all understand that, and then you have the non-medical, and then you have what we all call is touching the plant, which Derek has bravely stepped into. Is that a fair statement? Bravely. In the ballpark. And then you have the ancillary businesses, which is like Nick's business, where you're not directly touching it. And so the question is, how is that different? I mean, Nick, in your business, is that materially different? Do you see, whether from the perspective of potential investors, from the regulators, do you see that as distinction?
I mean, I think it's a lot easier for investors to look at a company like ours and see it as more investable just because we're not touching the plant. I think a lot of investors, and probably everyone here in this room, is trying to understand the cannabis industry a little bit better and how it works, and it's very nuanced. There's a lot of regulation and red tape. There's also a lot of uncertainty, as we've discussed. So I think a company like ours, we've built a platform on child-resistant packaging, which I think has helped change the public perception of cannabis and the sentiment towards it. If you look at all the ads, I don't know how many people here live in California, as I do, but all the ads for Prop 64 focused on the aspect of child-resistant packaging and regulating cannabis so that it's safer for children and families. And I think that's what gets a lot of voters that necessarily aren't users or don't want to participate in cannabis to say, hey, this is the better option. And I think our platform around child-resistant packaging has helped do that a little bit. So I think professional services coming into the industry, bringing that next level of expertise, people like us doing compliant packaging, people like Derek that are operating within a regulatory framework, that are paying taxes. I think all of this stuff is good for the industry. And to look at what we've been touching on really the new administration and the ability to affect change in the cannabis industry, I think the public perception is the biggest piece. That's what's really going to drive decisions ultimately. And we see now the new polls showing that well over 50% of the United States approves of legalizing cannabis, and that's people from both sides of the aisle. So the Democrats have traditionally been for it. Now the Republicans are seeing the economic and fiscal impact of legalizing cannabis. Colorado is a great example. Colorado has created last year 18,000 jobs for cannabis. There was almost $1 billion of cannabis sold, over $100 million in tax revenue, and that went directly into Colorado schools, police and fire programs, and pension plans. And when you look at cannabis as a job creator, I always tell people it's pound for pound or dollar for dollar. Cannabis creates more jobs than any other industry, because if I'm selling, let's say, alcohol or even ice cream in Colorado, and I'm doing $1 billion in sales versus cannabis that's $1 billion, the ice cream or the alcohol that's sold in Colorado probably was not produced there. It's probably produced elsewhere and brought in. It could have been produced internationally. Also, as an owner of those businesses, an alcohol company, I could be an international resident or a resident of, say, Washington State, profiting off Colorado. Well, with cannabis, everything sold in Colorado has to be produced in Colorado. So you're creating jobs that way. Everyone that works at a facility, cannabis business in Colorado, has to be a state resident. Any owner of the business has to be a state resident, and they're doing away with some of those residency requirements. But just as an example, cannabis is creating more jobs than anything else, and with an administration that ran on jobs, I don't see how they could go and disrupt that.
Now, just so everyone understands, it's because since cannabis is illegal federally, if you go from one state to the other state, you're going outside the state jurisdiction, and you go into federal jurisdiction. So when Nick talks about creating states in jobs in the state, you have to keep cannabis in the state that it's legal in, because when you cross over, you run afoul of the federal laws. Now, Isaac, just touching on touching the plant versus not, you were originally social media, and then did you get into software program too, and have you deviated from your model and getting closer to the plant in any way, or not really?
No, we're still not touching the plant. I mean, our platform connects our users, 900,000 users, with the products that they're looking for in their local area. So we think we have one of the largest data sets on what buyers are talking about in regulated cannabis markets. And that kind of gives us insights into things that very few other people have. And one of the reasons that we don't want to touch the plant is because investors are looking to make the most amount of money and the least amount of risk possible. And we just don't think that there's that much money in touching the plant over the long run. Ultimately, there's very little competitive advantages between growers. So, we've seen wholesale prices plunge in Colorado over the past few months. On the retail side, the dispensaries are kind of turning into liquor stores. There's some on every corner. I honestly go to the dispensary that's closest to me just because it's the most convenient. And at the end of the day, those dispensaries are probably going to be competing with delivery services. They already are here in California. And we've seen with other industries that consumers are kind of lazy. They like to get things delivered to their homes. So we think there's a tremendous amount of competition in those markets and not that many long-term competitive advantages. So we like to stay focused on technology that can scale rapidly with minimal marginal costs, that also has significantly less risk than the companies that do touch a plant. And if you touch a plant, you also have 280E, which takes away all the profits from those businesses. So it's difficult. 280, sorry.
280E is under the federal tax law where you cannot deduct certain expenses associated with running the business because under the federal tax law it's still illegal. So the ordinary business that you would take deductions for, you could take in connection with a cannabis company. And I guess let me just ask you though, Isaac, because when you can compare it to the Facebook of cannabis, but notwithstanding that, my understanding is you had certain regulatory issues initially that you did overcome in terms of the hurdles, but Facebook still seems to be around. So do you still have any of those regulatory issues?
Well, we were removed from the Google Play Store about 2.5 weeks ago. And this happens all the time in the marijuana industry. These large tech companies, they have no written policies related to marijuana because, heaven forbid, they put anything in writing. So they change all the time. And we went through a similar situation with Apple back 2 years ago, where we were actually kicked out and permanently banned from the App Store for 3 months until the industry actually helped us get back in the App Store in a major way. So that was awesome. But the tech companies are petrified in this space. They're absolutely petrified of it because, like, if you're Google and you're making billions upon billions of dollars every year, why are you going to risk, something so small over something that you have so little to gain, or risk so much over something you have so little to gain? I mean, the marijuana industry is less money than Google makes off their search engine in like 2 weeks. So it's just a blimp on their radar screen. But I forget what the question was. But the regulations are changing all the time. So that's just part of the fun. Like if you want to wake up and know what's going to happen in your regular job every single day, like the marijuana industry is not for you.
The short answer is part of the issue that he had originally, and part of the issue that the other technology companies have is because if you communicate with someone in a state that is not legal, that becomes the issue. That's where you came up with the geofencing originally, where if you're in a state that does not have legal marijuana and you're communicating to that state, that could again be a violation of federal law because you're going into the state. Isaac had originally come up with the geofencing where his app is only communicating with states that have legal marijuana.
Yep. And we're actually working on version 2.0 of that. That'll be released within the next 2 weeks. But we're actually taking it to a whole nother level in our new app that we're working with Google on. So literally people are going to have to be compliant with their own state programs, have an age attestation, and if we're going to be, we have a very intelligent screening program that screens out all illegal content. So there's actually a tremendous amount of data science and development that goes into creating these solutions. And I think that, compliance, this is a compliance industry, and, I think it will bring the whole industry forward.
But you still think touching the plant is different. So Derek, is there money in touching the plant?
I hope so. Listen, the periphery doesn't exist without the commodity itself, right? It just doesn't. But from an upside potential, Isaac's completely right. The way we purchase versus the way we've historically purchased is entirely different. I'm on Postmates and Amazon all the time. And I love the convenience of it. I travel a lot, I'm on the road a lot, so having that application available to me, and I think for cannabis it's going to be the same thing over the long haul. But that doesn't mean there's not a tremendous amount of upside and opportunity in the cannabis production itself. The real staying power and the margin integrity, though, from our perch and perspective, gets maintained through brand identity. So you can be a commodity grower or you can be a branded grower. And I would disagree with you. I think there is a tremendous amount of difference between strains and growers. It's not as drastic as a lot of people maintain, but there is competitive edge. Just like in wine, a lot of it's subjective, right? I mean, a lot of people will say Screaming Eagle is outstanding. Opus One is outstanding. You know, but there's $2 Chuck and they sell a tremendous amount of that. There's a market for that. So there's going to be a market for the entire supply chain, premium products all the way down to your base level products, call it, you know, Budweiser, cannabis, and everything in between. The distribution models are going to change over time. Brick and mortar, I think, will always exist. People are going to want that interaction, coupled with delivery, having the convenience of that, coupled with a finely tuned, automated app or technology system as a backbone of it. All those things are going to layer on, but they're going to mean increased production. It's going to mean increased consumption over time. And again, that's a greater opportunity for the commodity itself. If it's branded properly, you'll set yourself apart from everybody else. And I think over time, the industry really begins to bifurcate in two different directions. I think medical becomes really medical, and the FDA takes over, and the biotechs take over, and drugs are developed, and the cannabinoids are isolated, and compounds are put back together, all the things that are way over my head and I'm not smart enough to even plan. And then the other side, the recreational or adult use side, is going to take a deviation in a completely other direction, whether it ends up at 7-Elevens or gas stations or on apps, who knows, but that is going to be dominated from our perspective by brands, lifestyle brands. When I smoke IVXX, which is the brand that we put out, do I feel like that sexy model running in slow motion on the beach, you know, or that alpine skier? I mean, those are the things you think about it. That we buy brands and we wear clothes because of how things are marketed to us. We do. Every one of us can admit it. The watch we wear, the suits that we wear, identify us in some way, shape, or form, subliminally through marketing and advertising. We wear and we act according to what's dictated to us and what we gravitate towards. Cannabis is no different. So the people that excel and actually put a product out there in the community that people can relate to, whether it's a low-end product, a mid-tier product, a high-tier product, whatever it happens to be, there's a market for that. Those are the people that have staying power, and that will be the product that's ultimately in high demand through apps, through online services, through delivery. And that's where we're trying to position ourselves over the long haul. Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of upside in the plan. It's a tricky place to deal with right now, especially as a publicly traded company. But you know, we've had 4 West 1 registrations go through. We've got an S3 shelf done. Doing so, it's been expensive in a difficult place to navigate. But we think there's a tremendous opportunity to brand in the space. And the brand equals longevity.
Somebody came up with an interesting third tier where, you know, you have I think it will be going to CBDs and highly technical, and then you have the recreational, and then someone says in the middle, you probably have a nutraceutical component.
That's right.
Where I think you'll have that third level.
That's right.
And then, you know, it's not really, you know, diving down as deeply into the CBDs and those, but it's just making you feel good generally. And I think you're right about brand. But again, it's difficult to have a brand because of the state line issue. Okay, marijuana in Colorado is not going to necessarily be the same exact brand strain that you're going to have in a different state. So how does that factor into?
And I said this in my presentation. The cannabis industry is the only industry that I can think of right now that can get away with delivering you a different product on Tuesday in February versus October 13th. You know, if I go to Starbucks and I get a mocha in Colorado than I do here in LA and I get a different product, I'm pissed off, and it's unacceptable to me. The cannabis industry, I buy OG Kush in San Diego, and I go to Colorado and buy OG Kush, or forget it. I go into Colorado and buy OG Kush, and I go to the store right next to the one in Colorado and buy OG Kush. I'm probably getting a different product, and maybe not even OG Kush. So those things are going to change as technologies change and those types of things, and access to information and that stuff begins to perpetrate and permeate. But brand consistency and brand loyalty and recognition is significant. That's one of the things we want to make sure we provide, which is why vertical integration is so important. Is the same product over and over and over again consistently, and a broad array of products, so people have the ability to select. And when they go into the retail experience, they have the same experience every time, same wall finishes, same flooring. Brick and mortar is always going to exist, at least in the not too near future. It'll be coupled with the companies like Amazon and whatnot. But if I go on my Amazon app and it's the different format, a different setup every time I go up, and I have to find where to click and how to load my cart and stuff, that's going to be irritating. So consistency and brand recognition is developed through that, delivering the same experience and the same product day in, day out, month in, month out at all locations. And that's, from our perch, that's how we differentiate ourselves, because it doesn't exist right now.
it's interesting that you talked about the SEC and how you have had registration statements effective. I mean, Leslie, this past week was very monumental where the New York Stock Exchange listed an IPO. Read on.
Correct. And we haven't seen other companies have registration statements go effective. The company that I'm on the board of, Growblock Sciences, touches the plant in Nevada, and they actually had a registration statement. I think 2 of them go effective.
So they declare effective, or they go effective?
They go effective. And I think that was true also for Terra. I don't think that the SEC declared it effective. It went effective by
The first 3 went through the time lapse. I think the last, well, the S3 we got accelerated.
So just so everyone's clear, you know, typically when you have an effective registration statement, you'll file an acceleration request, and the SEC will say okay, and then 48 hours later you'll be effective. What has been happening in this space is instead of the SEC declaring it effective after 20 days by operation of law under 8A, it's automatically going effective. And really the reason for that is the SEC is not making the decision to wade into that, and they're just letting it happen, and again, just keeping the hands off it. However, this week had to be different because of the registration statement for the IPO.
That's right.
Effective.
That's right. And trading on the New York Stock Exchange today.
So what do you think the significance of that is?
I think that this is just, one step in an arc towards the ultimate drop of federal prohibition in 4, 5, 6, 7 years. I think that it's going to be a matter of time before we see one of these companies, whether it is Kush Bottles or MassRoots or Terra or another one of the businesses out there, get uplisted and actually be traded on the larger exchanges. I think we're going to see more companies that are going to be publicly traded on the New York and National. And I'll make a prediction. In 2017, we're going to see the first company reverse merge into a publicly traded NASDAQ shell that's going to touch the plant. And so we're going to see this happen more and more. And at some point, the gold will be out of the mine, and the SEC and anyone else is not going to really be able to push it back in.
I'm glad you went with that analogy.
I mean, I think it's monumental. I mean, it's the first IPO, so they had to declare it effective. The New York Stock Exchange listed. I think you're really beyond any point where you can pretend that it's not happening now. The SEC used to do it through 8A, let it go effective. We don't know what's happening. Now they declare it effective and they let it sell. So, I mean, I want another couple of quick questions, and then I want to open it up to questions from the audience. But, I mean, just very quickly, what do you think, what excites you most in the next couple of years in terms of where you see the industry going, Derek?
Well, for me, I like that broad kind of spread from medical to, maybe nutraceutical fits in the middle. But I really would like lifestyle brands, and I'd like the adult use stuff to take over. People that want to market, brand, and structure their companies associated with that. I think that, to me, is one of the most exciting things, regardless of the metric, the way they acquire the product, whether it's through an application or brick and mortar. I love the idea of brands standing out. I love the idea of consistency. I love the idea of getting the same thing over and over again. To me, that's pretty exciting. We'd like to have some semblance of a foothold in it, but I think you're going to see the industry to continue to spread its wings. You're seeing a tremendous amount of capital come to the space that you just haven't seen in the prior years. And like I said, the public perception coupled with the swing states, the bipartisan support, all of these things are now becoming tailwinds when they were headwinds prior. This reduces the risk, it brings in the extra capital we need for people to execute on their business models in all areas of the supply chain. But I'm really excited about that kind of broadening out of that adult use application. I've been an adult use user since 15 years old, so I'm also a medical user. And I'm also a medical user too. I broke my neck 9 years ago, and I've used cannabis because I just wasn't going the opiate direction. But I think we have enough social impact now that we understand that legalization and regulation isn't that scary animal that we thought it was going to be. It's not going to turn our kids into heroin users in alleys, right? People may have addictive issues with it, but they're going to have addictive issues with just about anything. We need to make sure that there's treatment and resources available to them, but overall prohibition just doesn't work. The model doesn't work. I think everybody's beginning to understand that. And they used to be able to lie, and thanks to social media, people can't do that anymore. We see a drop in teen use, a drop in crime. We see less opiate abuse. I mean, the reality is we actually have quantifiable data now. We didn't have that a few years ago. And people were able to wave the flag, and they still try to do that. Chris Christie in New Jersey on his radio show the other night, every single study has come out and has proven this is a gateway drug. You can't say that anymore. Google exists. But they still try.
And so does MassRoots.
And so does MassRoots.
And what excites you? Where do you think? What excites you in the next 5 years in terms of the industry heading?
it's becoming a mainstream commodity. More and more people are entering the space. I mean, I've come to these conferences, I think, every year for 3 years now, and the rooms just keep getting bigger and more people and more new faces, so it's great. But just on the, our first S1 went effective by operation of law back in 2014, and then mid-2015 we started getting the declarations declaring them effective. And we applied for the NASDAQ back last year, and then we submitted an S1 to uplist to the NASDAQ, and we went through the SEC comment process and the NASDAQ comment process simultaneously. And the SEC was not the holdup there. And I think part of the reason why the REIT was allowed to list was because the exchanges are looking at the actual, at the operations of the business, and the REIT actually didn't have any real operations, which is part of the reason why the IPO kind of failed. They weren't really doing anything, so it's hard to prove that there's nothing there for them to make the argument that it shouldn't be allowed. So it's an absolutely fascinating.
I would suggest to you that the SEC's requirements really about disclosure. So
yeah, well, the SEC, I'm talking about
only
the exchanges. I'm talking about the exchanges. That's what I'm saying. I was purely, but that's neither here nor
So
there.
Nick, what do you look favorably for the next 5 years in terms of developments in the industry?
Well, I think I'm looking forward to, sort of what Derek was mentioning about the expansion of recreational adult use. Now so many more people have access. I like to see the numbers of, people now coming to use the plant that weren't using it before. Technology, like what Isaac's working on. I think the industry's far behind the times in technology because it's moved from a black market, and in a black market, the last thing you want is trackability and traceability. You want to be on that prepaid Metro phone. So I think a lot of these operators, as more white collar operators come into the space, are going to start to look to leverage technology like you would in any other industry. And then the biggest area that excites me is in the form factors, in the way that it's evolving to allow people access to cannabis in different forms. So now, if you want to go get an edible, you're not limited to brownies and cookies. There's a full spectrum of anything from gummy bears to frozen gelato that you can get that's actually medicated, has cannabis in it. And then there's also, all the different extracted forms, so your wax, your hash, your shatter, your oil, the vape pens, those are becoming super popular and even literally and figuratively exploding. So what I like about that, though, the reason it excites me is because now you can get more people access to cannabis that wouldn't traditionally spark up a joint or take a rip from a bong, are more likely to pop a gummy bear in their mouth or something like that that's less obtrusive. So you're attracting more people to try it and to use it and to see where it can help them. And then also the bioavailability of these form factors. So instead of just, hey, I have a pain in my arm because I have a tennis elbow, I have to take a brownie and get knocked out. Well, sure, that helps the pain. But if I can take a transdermal patch and apply it directly to my tennis elbow and localize the treatment, that could be more effective and also not have the psychological effect. So the different form factors and bioavailability and the way that that's evolving, I think, is important in attracting new people to the industry, but having existing people have better experiences with the product.
All right, I just got a signal from the back, so let me turn out the questions and see if anybody has any questions. Please.
Can you discuss what's going on in the banking industry? Where do you see that progressing?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the banking, and again, banking because it really taps into the Federal Reserve and it goes into banking issues, and people having trouble banking. Talk about trouble banking. Do you have any issues with banking?
What are the downsides of touching the plant? It's still an issue, right? I mean, you're able to find some, fragmented local banks and that type of thing that are willing to take it. A lot of them will start off, they'll realize the compliance hurdle, the AML issues and those types of things. They'll dump the accounts, move on with their lives. It's an industry that's growing. People are starting to get on the bandwagon. I think we need some broader reform before the big boys come into play right now. But it's a frustrating reality that we unfortunately deal in. But those issues are flowing upstream. So what's an issue to us economically and financially is not being able to put all the money in the bank and dealing with the audits, especially as a public company, and maintaining compliance, the SOX 404, and that type of stuff. But our irritations are migrating upstream. I ran $275,000 of $10 and $20 bills to the Board of Equalization to pay our sales tax. Now, that problem has become theirs, and they're more powerful than I am, and they're more important than I am. And to the tune of millions and tens of millions of dollars they've been dealing with cash. So now we've got the Board of Equalization that put together a task force working with the Northern California Federal Reserve. We have the California Treasurer just reach out to the Trump's administration. People need this solved, and it's not just us. And it won't happen with the industry crying foul. It's going to happen when those issues and irritations migrate upstream. The taxing authorities in all these states don't have an audit point. They can't come in and audit a facility that buys $5 worth of pot, sells it for 10, takes that money and rinses and repeats that process. There was never a deposit to a bank or a credit card transaction. Technology will help that, but they're missing a tremendous amount of taxation because it's the honor system. So I think it gets fixed over some time. Whether it's 1 year or 2 years, I couldn't tell you.
And to Derek's point, a big issue you're seeing is because there's so much cash on a lot of these dispensaries, you have robberies, you have assault, and you have people getting shot. And I think in terms of making people aware of it, that certainly is going to heighten the issue. But there are banks that are working through it. KYC issues are getting resolved, and there is an effort underway now to try to deal with that issue. Any other questions? Please.
Yeah, what's your guys' main initiative in your business in the next 6 months? Where do you see the most opportunity, and where do you want to grow your businesses, for the next 6 months, year?
Sure. Wow. I think it's really for the next 6 months and a year. It's such a short time horizon. I think one of the big level sets that can give people perspective is in Nevada when we passed medical marijuana in 2013. To build out the Nevada market, you're talking about 60 licenses for dispensaries, 100 licenses for cultivation, 100 licenses for extraction, 10 labs. And some substantial portion of those have been built out. Over $400 million has been invested in that infrastructure, just for the medical marijuana market there. We now have licenses given out recently by Hawaii, by Maryland. We have regulations being completed in Ohio and Pennsylvania. We have everything that passed in the last election. California, Nevada, Massachusetts, Maine, with adult use medical in Florida, a substantial medical program in Florida, Arkansas, Montana, North Dakota. When you look at the amount of capital that's going to have to be invested across the country in that infrastructure, you're talking about $20 billion over the next 4 years that's going to need to be raised and invested in that infrastructure. And it's massive. And then something else that'll add, what we're looking at is not just adult use cannabis, not just medical marijuana, not just nutraceutical. There's pharmaceuticals that are going to be developed based on cannabis in Pennsylvania, for example. And instead of 7 years and $1 billion, it'll be a year and 10 million to get a drug to market. You're going to see hemp with plastics, hemp with paper, hemp with fabric, hemp with industrial chemicals. You're going to see the ancillary market be of a massive size. You'll see veterinary uses for cannabis. So overall, over 10 years, you're not talking about a $20 billion industry. You're talking about a $200 billion industry. And seeing people start preparing for all of those, not just adult use of medical marijuana.
One more question, you guys.
I was wondering if anybody can enlighten us on which institutions are doing the research on both sides of the fence that would be important to follow. That would be ultimately, something that the government would.
Well, initially, because it's illegal, there was not a lot of research done. That you'll see is already getting lessening. There is more statewide research because the states can do it. There's more college research in the universities, and the federal universities are now lessening up, and they're allowing more.
Is there any direct that you can point to that has a big say that people from both sides of the fence respect?
A lot of research is coming out of Israel.
Yes.
A lot of research is going to come out of Pennsylvania.
Any name of an institution in Israel that you can point to?
In the calendar report.
Yeah.
Exactly. Cowan has put out a report in the U.S. And they're very bullish on the industry.
Look at Brookings Institute. We'll cite a lot of good research, and look at New Frontiers. They have some good data that they're putting out. So those are two places that I look. New Frontiers in particular is putting out a lot of good data.
UCI and RAND did a study on, but it was a little pertinent, but on opiate abuse in regulated states. UCI, University of California, Rain Corp, they did a study on that. So you see a lot of fragmented studies, but but there's more and more data out there on a daily basis, fortunately. And I'm excited for free samples here at LD next year.
We are into that.